Hello, everyone. Welcome to this briefing with the Jerusalem Institute for Policy Research on the occasion of the release of their 2022 Facts and Trends study prior to the Jerusalem Day, this coming Sunday. With us today to discuss this study are Dr. David Koren, Director General of the Institute. Dr. Koren, who has a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies, is former senior official in the Ministry of Education's 5-year strategic plan for education in East Jerusalem, and also former advisor on Arab and East Jerusalem to Mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat. So he brings to us today a lot of expertise and experience in the affairs of Jerusalem. Also with us today is Yair Assaf-Shapira, Head of Data Analysis and Services at the Institute, who believes, as he often says, that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Yair is a co-editor of the Jerusalem Statistical Yearbook, among other publications of the Institute. We start with a short introduction by Yair Koren, by Dr. Koren, with emphasis on East Jerusalem, followed by a presentation of the study by Yair Assaf-Shapira, and then we'll move to Q&A. Everybody except the speakers are on mute, and you can place your questions on the chat box. The session will last 35 minutes exactly. Dr. Koren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to me to have this discussion with you. Thank you, Uri, for the invitation, for the organization. So I will speak with you a little bit about our institute. I've started my job as a Director General of the Institute half a year ago. Formerly, as Uri mentioned, I was a Director of the Strategic Plan for Education in East Jerusalem. And I worked intimately with the leadership in East Jerusalem of all of the issues of daily life. So after I will introduce our institution, I will focus a few seconds on the strategic situation in East Jerusalem, which, as you know, is fascinating every time. So our institution was established in 1978 by the late Mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, who thought that Jerusalem, as the capital of Israel and one of the most fascinating and interesting cities of the world, must have a unique research center, which will enable the municipality and the government to decide over the policy toward Jerusalem with a large base of database and information. Our institute is specializing not only in Jerusalem, but also in areas of the challenges of Israel as a state. And we think that Jerusalem is a perfect lab for learning about challenges of relationship between Jews and Arabs, ultra-Orthodox and secular in Jerusalem. We think that a lot of challenges that we have in Jerusalem are similar to challenges that a lot of capitals have all over the world. This is why we are cooperating with research center in the United States, in Britain, and other areas. So this is about our institution. We have 4 teams. One team is headed by Yair, focusing on the issue of data and data analyzing. The other group is headed by Uri Praver, which was formerly the head of the branch of employees sector in the government of Israel. And his team is working over issues of the social network of Jerusalem. Another team is headed by Dr. Chava Ehrlich and focusing on zoning and planning. And we have a team headed by Benny Pfefferman, which is focusing over issues of economy and financial issues. So this is a little bit about our research center. You are very invited to enter our website and to see our research. I will go forward to the issue of East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, as I reckon, is one of the most fascinating areas all over the world. After the victory of Israel in the Battle of 67, the 6 Days War, Israel took the responsibility over 19 neighborhoods which were under the Jordanian regime. And now we are speaking about approximately 400,000 residents in East Jerusalem. In 67, we spoke about approximately 50,000. So how the amount of residents went up so dramatically, mainly because of a large amount of kids for every family, and a lot of transformation of residents of Judea and Samaria who married their husband or wife from East Jerusalem. They went from Judea and Samaria, mainly Hebron, to live in Jerusalem. They got an Israeli residency, and they became residents of Jerusalem and the state of Israel. I'm speaking about residents, not citizens, because after 67, the government of Israel decided that the residents of Jerusalem, the majority of them are Muslims and only a little part are Christians. The government of Israel decided to give them a unique status, which recognize them as residents, which means that they can vote to the municipality, but they cannot vote to the elections of the government. They are not allowed to get another nationality other than Israeli or Jordanian, and they don't have the ability to go abroad more than 7 years, because if they will go abroad more than 7 years and then come back to Israel, they will be recognized as tourists and not as resident. This is why their status is unique. And we can see in the last 4 years an increase of 47% of Palestinian Arabs from East Jerusalem who are applying to the Ministry of Interior in Israel in order to change their status from residency to become a full citizens of Israel. Now I will share with you a little some slides.
Can you, David, can you clarify 47% increase, right?
Increase, right.
Okay. But what is the total number or percentage of East Jerusalemites who apply for this status?
There were, I think that there is a potential for much more, but the challenge is that the process is very long. And in order to get an Israeli full citizenship, you have to get a security clearance, which is challenging for a lot of East Jerusalemites. And you have to tell that you will be committed to the state of Israel, which is politically very, very challenging for the Palestinians of East Jerusalem. And you have to know Hebrew quite well, which is also a challenge for East Jerusalem, which means that when we will speak about East Jerusalem, we will see that the East Jerusalemites, the Palestinians of East Jerusalem, feel themselves trapped between the PA in Ramallah and the Israeli regime in Jerusalem, because they do not feel that they are fully connected to the Jerusalem municipality. The majority of the Palestinians of East Jerusalem do not vote to the City Council of Jerusalem. This is why in the City Council of Jerusalem, there haven't been, between 67 till our days, even one representative of, even one council member, which is Palestinian, Muslim or Christian. There were a few who tried to get into the city council, but they were intimidated and they didn't have enough votes in the polls. So the situation right now is very challenging because they are not part of the PA and they are under Israeli control, but from the political and identical point of view, they don't see themselves tightly connected to the state of Israel, the majority of them. The reason that a lot of them are going to the Ministry of Interior in order to change their status mainly related to the opportunity to go abroad back and forth much easily when you are a full Israeli citizen and not resident. So speaking about the situation in East Jerusalem, I think that what is happening on the ground, that we can see a growing sense of isolation on this, on the side of deepening foreign involvement, which means that the East Jerusalemites, remember we speak about 400,000 residents, they see that the government of Israel is trying very hard in the last 10 years to invest much more finance measures, and the government of Israel is spending billions of shekels in order to build new schools, new roads in East Jerusalem, to increase and to make the quality of life much better. But they do not understand why did the Israeli government change its agenda towards Jerusalem, because after dozens of years of neglections of Israel, this change in the Israeli agenda is being seen from the Palestinian side in a very suspicious way, which means, what do they want from us when they spend so much money? And I think that there is a lot of tension in the relationship between of the residents and the Israeli government and municipality. Premier Mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, and the recent and Mayor Moshe Leon, which is the mayor of Jerusalem, we've met him today, are spend a lot of efforts in order to make a change in the quality of life of East Jerusalem, but the gap is tremendous. So what we can see that not only the Israeli side is investing more in East Jerusalem, we can see external Islamic actors who spend a lot of efforts in order to make a change in East Jerusalem. I think that the main actor is Turkey, headed by Erdogan, which is spending hundreds of millions of Turkish money in order to get involved in what is happening in East Jerusalem, mainly in the old city. The Arab world is deeply interested in the issues of East Jerusalem, but they have to deal with internal challenges, both in Syria, both in Lebanon, and both in Egypt. The Palestinian National Authority is trying to get more, to gain more power in East Jerusalem, but they have a lot of problem to do it, since the government of Israel in the Oslo Agreement decided that East Jerusalem is not an area which the Palestinian Authority can actually act on the field. Hamas is recognized in Israel as in other areas, countries, as a terror organization. This is why he's tightly restricted by the security forces of Israel and the police. The international community is spending much more effort in the issue of Israel, but they are not investing a lot of money and budget. Israeli Arab movements is actually not interested deeply in what is happening in East Jerusalem, because the East Jerusalem Palestinians do not have the ability to vote in the national elections. This is why they are not potential voters for the Israeli Arab movements. Jordan has a lot of interest in what is happening in the old city and mainly in the Temple Mount, but Jordan is not very, very strong on the streets in East Jerusalem. And I think that the actor which is gaining more and more power is Turkey and Erdogan, who see East Jerusalem as an area that he can fulfill his dream about creating the new Islamic Caliphate of Turkey. Now, when we look strategically over the challenges of East Jerusalem, we see that East Jerusalem is a society at a historic junction. There is a frustration in four dimensions. The first one, communal and political detachment from the PA, separation fence that was created in 2005 until 2007, created a detached between Ramallah, which is the government of the PA and East Jerusalem. There are a lot of challenges of poverty and social gaps. The situation in Jerusalem is very, very difficult from the social point of view. Approximately 80% are under the average poverty line. There is a feeling of loneliness that no one cares, not the PA, not the Israeli. There is ambiguity around questions of personal, communal, and national future. due to the special status of resident and not citizen. This is creating, this frustration, it leads to two types of reaction to Israel, which are seems as not going on the same direction, but they do involve with each other. From one point, Israel is the root of the problem because it's from the Palestinian point of view, East Jerusalem is a conquered land by Israel. But on the other hand, increasing the involvement in the life of West Jerusalem, learning Hebrew, learning the Israeli curriculum and not the Palestinian curriculum, which we have a growing number of pupils who are learning by the Israeli curriculum and not by the Palestinian curriculum. Going to the Israeli Hebrew University in the matter of Scopus, all the involvement in the Israeli hospitals, learning about primacy in West Jerusalem, working in West Jerusalem, which means that involvement with Israel and with the western side of Jerusalem is the key to a solution.
Yair, we would like to maybe give, sorry, I said Yair, but I meant David. We need to give Yair also a chance.
Yes, I'm just thinking this is why we can see a struggle between accelerated and unprecedented integration from the one side, and on the other side, we can see struggle against the normalization. These two trends are lying side by side in East Jerusalem, and there is an inner struggle between the pragmatization and the more instrumental side and the more ideological Islamic and national side. This is the challenges of East Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Uri. And
thank you, David. And let me remind our viewers that all this material is embargoed until tomorrow at 6 a.m. And now we move to Yair Assaf-Shapira, who will present the highlights of the study.
Jerusalem maintains its position as the largest city in Israel, the largest city proper in Israel. It's approaching 1 million residents. Jerusalem, in terms of population, is a league of its own. The second largest city in Israel, being Tel Aviv, is half the size of Jerusalem's population, and Haifa, third city in terms of population, is third the size of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, in terms of city proper, is the most large city in Israel by far. When we look at the three populations of Jerusalem, three populations, and the three main populations, being Palestinians, Haredi Jews, and general population Jews. Three populations are sharing the city, approximately third. Each population is approximately third of the population, and anyway, none of them is the majority of the population. None of the three populations is a majority. This is very different than the situation in Israel as a whole, and it's very, very different than the situation in Tel Aviv and Haifa, where both the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox minorities are very, very small. So it's a different story than other mixed cities, or may I say, so-called mixed cities in Israel. Now, in terms of the metropolitan area, the metro area of Jerusalem, it's the other way around. The metro area of Jerusalem is much smaller than the one of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv metro area is more than 4 million people. 4 million people. That's, as we sometimes say it, from Hedera to Gedera. It's most of the central part of Israel. And as I said, more than 4 million people are receiving services, meaning employment, commerce, etc., in Tel Aviv. This is the largest, by far, metropolitan area in Israel. Jerusalem's metropolitan area is no more than 1.3 or maybe 1.4 million people. Much, much smaller. And the other difference is not, first of all, it's smaller than Tel Aviv. Second, it's also most of the metro area of Jerusalem is the city proper itself, which means that if people come from the outskirts into the city, for example, for work, and they create added value, this added value is supposed to provide for the city's almost million residents. So this is differences in terms of population. One more thing, two things actually about the metro area. The metro area, as I said, is much smaller, but we do have a large population who is on the outskirts of Jerusalem, but it's not participating in the life of the city. And this is, of course, the Palestinian population in the West Bank. This population is separated from Jerusalem by the fence, by the security fence. But if I may say, it's like the potential of this population is a potential of a few hundred thousands of residents of West Bank to participate in this metro area. So it's a potentially larger metro area. Two more things. One about the poverty. The poverty rate of Jerusalem is, as you said, David, it's high. It's higher not only compared to Israel, but also when you compare the groups themselves, meaning that the Palestinians in Jerusalem have a higher poverty rate than the Arabs of Israel. I want to finish on an optimistic note. What we saw, well, it's not so optimistic. What we saw on the on the COVID-19 during the last 2 years, in terms of work, in terms of I don't want to say the word occupation, in terms of work, we saw that the participation in the labor force among Arab women rose quite, not dramatically, but there was a rise. We can, as I said, we can give the figures. It was supposed to be on the presentation, but something's not working, so we can give the figures by email. But we saw a rise in the participation in labor force of Arab women in Jerusalem, which is a population. The Arab women of Jerusalem, it's a population who's participating in very low figures in the workforce. So it's a blessing. It's something that the policy in Jerusalem is trying to achieve for many years. So it's a blessing. But on the other side, we saw that Arab men in Jerusalem, the participation in labor force dropped. It dropped by a significant rate, and we account that to the COVID-19 because many of the Palestinians of East Jerusalem are occupied in the tourism industry, which is, as you know, at a more or less at a standstill, or was at a standstill for the past 2 years. So I apologize for not being able to share the PowerPoint presentation, but I'll end with that.
We'll share it. We'll share it with the
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A question came in. The common wisdom is that Jerusalem is losing its non-religious residents who are moving to Tel Aviv or other areas, and is being taken over by the ultra-Orthodox. Does the data back this assumption? No.
The data is the opposite. You see that all groups of Jewish residents of Jerusalem are migrating out of the city. That means secular people, religious people, and ultra-Orthodox people. I can only say, just look at Bet Shemesh. Bet Shemesh is almost 100% people who migrated out from Jerusalem, ultra-Orthodox people who migrated out of Jerusalem. When we look at the percentages within the city, we can see a shift, but it's very, very slow, and it's not that secular people of Jerusalem are vanishing in the coming future.
Another question, maybe David can answer it as well. Who governs East Jerusalem? I mean, in real life, because on one hand, the municipality, maybe the government is throwing money there in infrastructure, education, etc. But on the other side, we see Hamas has a lot of power there. So who really governs East Jerusalem?
It's a fascinating question. I think that there is an inner struggle between two separate factors and power of powers who are trying to rule the streets of Jerusalem. One is the more pragmatic wing, who is not oriented with Israel. None of them are Zionists, but they see themselves, for example, principals of schools head of community centers and actors and social actors who are coordinating their strategic plans and their actions on the ground with the government of Israel and with the municipality. This is one main trend. The other main trend, which is in some neighborhoods, such like Isawiya, has a lot of power, and in other neighborhoods, such as Bet Safafa, has lower average power, is the more ideological Islamic or national powers, such like Fatah, the Popular Democratic Front, and Hamas, and the Popular Front, who telling the authorities of Israel and the municipality, even if you will spread gold all over our neighborhood, we won't cooperate with you, because from the ideological Palestinian national and Islamic point of view, we do not recognize the sovereignty of Israel over East Jerusalem. So I think that in a lot of neighborhoods, we can see an inner struggle between these two powers.
Another question that just came in, you mentioned the education in East Jerusalem, and is there really a shift between the Jordanian curriculum and Israeli curriculum? Because we understand that the city or the government are building a lot of new classrooms or schools, but has the content changed as well?
Okay, so a little bit historic background between 1967 and the Oslo Agreement in 1994, the curriculum was the Jordanian one. Between 1994 until our days, the curriculum, the majority of the schools are learning by the Palestinian curriculum, the Tawjihi. What we can see in the last 5 or 10 years is that the amount of students who are choosing to learn by the Israeli curriculum, which is also being learned in schools in Jaljulia and Kalanswa, which means cities of citizens of Israel, of the 48 Israeli Arabs. We can see a growing number of students in East Jerusalem, of pupils in East Jerusalem, who are choosing to learn by the Israeli curriculum and not by the Palestinian curriculum. 5 years ago, the percentage of kids who learned by the Israeli curriculum was 5. And nowadays, we are speaking of a tripled percentage, approximately 15 or 16% of the pupils are learning by the Israeli curriculum. And you can see that the amount of East Jerusalemites, Palestinian East Jerusalemites, who are learning in the Israeli academic universities, such like the Hebrew University, Bezalel University, and others, has been tripled and doubled during the last years.
A question by Isabel Kirshner, New York Times. Has there been any discernible shift in East Jerusalem in any tangible aspect since President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
Generally speaking, no. I can say that the Fatah movement encouraged its supporters during the announcement of President Trump's over the embassy in Jerusalem. The Fatah movement called its supporters to attack in any violence actions or protest actions toward Israel. We didn't see it dramatically on the ground. What I've heard from leadership in East Jerusalem is that if actually the state of United States is putting its embassy, its formal embassy in Jerusalem, so let's act as Jerusalem is actually united, and please help us to get more and more Israeli citizenship and not residency, which means if you change the political status of Jerusalem, help us to become full citizens of Israel.
Last question by Hannah Beris, Spanish media. In the last few months, we have seen a terrible radicalization on the Palestinian side. And only yesterday, we learned about a Hamas cell composed of people who hold blue Israeli ID cards in East Jerusalem. Is, in your opinion, this is approach of East Jerusalem Arabs in general, or only the most radical, vocal extremists of them?
The majority of the Palestinians in East Jerusalem are not involved in terror attacks and in terror activity. They are not involved in violence. The majority of them, I can say it after working very closely with them for the last 12 years, the vast majority of the Palestinians in East Jerusalem do not seek any kind of violence or terror attacks against Israelis. There is quite a small group, which is, some of them are identified with the more national wings, such like Fatah and the Popular Democratic Front, and the others with the more Islamic wing, such like Hamas, who are dealing with issues of terror and violence, but the vast majority are not dealing with issues of violence. The majority of the residents of East Jerusalem want to live their life peacefully and quietly.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Dr. David Koren, Yair Assaf-Shapira. Excellent presentations and insights. You can get their material, including the PowerPoint presentation we couldn't see today, either directly by us or through Gil, the spokesman of the Institute. A lot of it is on their website. Thanks to the journalists who have joined us today. And I'd like to thank my colleagues from JPC, Talia Dekel and Eli Klutstein, for facilitating this event. Stay tuned to our next event, and goodbye. And let's hope next Sunday, Jerusalem Day, will be a quiet one. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.